Thank you. Thank you, Svanti, for this introduction, and thank you for having me during this conference. During this talk, I would like to focus on how the perception of fashion has changed during the pandemic. And before starting, I must point out that the argument that I will introduce was formed through my personal considerations and observations on fashion as a routine that accompanies us daily. In other words, the argument is based on brief remarks on the relation between COVID-19 and our practice of dressing ourselves every day. The main claim that I want to discuss concerns the alteration the pandemic has brought to our everyday life. Specifically, I wish to claim that the pandemic has altered not only fashion business in terms of sales and consumes, but also our awareness of the routine of dressing and our attitudes towards garments. The path to corroborate this claim begins with the observation that COVID-19 has created a different reality with which we interact. In fact, given the increasing restriction that every country has undergone starting from last year, our everyday dimension has been significantly reshaped. A clear example of the changes our routines have gone through is the obligation of wearing protective garments, such as the facial mask. We are now supposed to always wear a facial mask in public and closed space, or in some countries, even in open air spaces during quarantine. Wearing a mandatory facial mask in these occasions is the clearest example of the influence that COVID-19 is having on our routines. Before the pandemic, the facial mask was not contemplated as a necessary garment, except for some Asian countries where facial masks were worn as a protection against pollution, and in some way they became fashionable. Today, instead, even famous fashion designers feel the urge of creating brand-related fashion masks, for example, Burberry, and more designers are likely to embrace this trend in the future. That some of our clothing routines have been altered by COVID-19 is perhaps to some extent obvious. However, fashion is deeply connected to consumers and societal attitudes. Therefore, COVID-19 had major consequences on how we depict and interpret fashion trends, with consequences that are far less obvious. The argument that I tend to put forward in order to show the alteration that the pandemic has brought to our perception of everyday dressing is based on two background assumptions. The first assumption concerns the intention involved in the acting of dressing ourselves daily. With the term intention, I refer to the Latin etymological sense tendere, interpreted as to direct our attention towards an object. In this sense, applying the term intention to the everyday practice of dressing ourselves implies first and foremost the choice of items and accessories to wear, which is an intentional one, insofar as one wants to appear in public in a certain way. In other words, when we choose to dress up day by day in a certain way, we are determining our intention to appear in a certain manner. The second background assumption is that through our daily intentional choices concerning what we wear, we can communicate something. Nonetheless, the kind of communication with which the garments are involved is not attributable to verbal language, since clothes cannot communicate a stable and fixed meaning. Rather, dresses continually acquire new meanings, which are strictly dependent upon the context in which they are worn. These two background assumptions are well captured by and argued for by Ian King in his The Aesthetic of Dress, where we read that, and I quote, "The choice of dress provides evidence for an intentional communication rather than simply a product of random choice," unquote. The combination and display of certain fashion items and accessories is the outcome of an intentional choice that we make every day in order to appear in a precise way in front of others. Consequently, the impact that the chosen outfit has on the public is purposeful, insofar as dressing ourselves up is an intentional act aimed at communicating to others something about us. Hence, Keel says, garments, and I quote, provide concrete and visible evidence of intention with regards to communication, unquote. Now, given these two background assumptions, I wish to claim that the elements of intentionality and communication in dressing have undergone a moderate but significant modification during the pandemic. Concerning the intentionality inherent to the routine of dressing, I believe that the pandemic has brought a discrepancy between what one is actually wearing and what one wishes or intends to wear. Besides the dramatic fall of revenues in the fashion business in 2020 for a total loss of 640 billion in sales, we shop and consequently wear mostly casual clothes such as loungewears, sweatpants and comfy garments, as well as art, leisure and technical clothes, as we were at least allowed to exercise outdoors. To some extent, this casualness linked to the fashion of the pandemic is not new, insofar as it is an extension of an existing trend. However, it seems to me that during this year, starting with the arrival of the pandemic, fashion trends had a radical shift because of our everyday life has been so profoundly altered. A related point is the following. In some ways, in 2020, clothing has become less about appearance and more about physical and emotional comfort, about, we might say, familiarity. What became certain during our quarantine days was to find clothing items that makes us feel we can handle all that's been thrown at us on a daily basis, while still maintaining a bit of who we were before, and keeping in mind who we hope to be afterwards. In short, homeware trend has undoubtedly conquered the podium of fashion since we were obliged to enact social distancing and to work from home. Comfort has dictated our spending, yet we still try to be ourselves to our clothes, to cope to our clothes, to the best of our possibilities. Since our normality has been modified by the increased restrictions and we are advised to stay at home as much as possible, what we actually wear and what we intend to wear day by day don't coincide anymore. In other words, the significant change in our routines, such as going to the workplace or to social gatherings or to entertainment events, has had an impact on our intentionality with respect to clothing. Before the arrival of the pandemic, we could choose between a wide range of items based on different occasions, such as a party or a wedding or a dinner with friends and family, and our styles and preferences. Whereas during the pandemic, we actually have chosen other kinds of garments precisely because we have nowhere to go but home and not much to communicate through our clothes. Although during the pandemic, it has been still possible to choose to wear what we would wear in a normal day at work, we, or the majority of us, have made and are making a different choice. In other words, we have the possibility of doing the same choices that we did before the quarantine in terms of dressing, but we don't. It is as if the aesthetic space of dressing contracted all of a sudden. This reduction of possibilities is ultimately due to the fact that a great number of contexts in which we would be inclined to wear different kinds of items suddenly disappear from our lives. And although we could in principle wear those items at home, we would lack sense or meaning there. However, notwithstanding the home confinement has produced less occasion to go out and consequently to communicate through clothes, I think that the pandemic did not affect our ability to communicate not verbally through dresses. It is more reasonable, I believe, to assert that in the light of the restriction caused by the pandemic, we have switched the channel of communication. In fact, since the occasion and context in which we could wear certain kind of garments suddenly disappeared during the quarantine, we manifested our intentionality in social networks. For example, Instagram and TikTok pullulated short videos, stories, and posts about fashion-related content. Here in the PPT presentation, I insert this post by the Ashley Urban on the 27th of April 2020, which in my opinion depict a at the best the new relation between COVID and fashion. And she's saying that basically the COVID never stopped fashion styles and how we display our fashion preferences in everyday dressing. It is true that even before the arrival of the pandemic, these networks already offered us a vast range of fashion-related content. However, I believe that somehow sharing outfits and possible outfits on social networks during the quarantine became virtually the only way to show our choices in terms of dresses and therefore to communicate with others. We communicate, for example, what we would have liked to wear if there were no COVID, or how to be stylish notwithstanding the COVID. And all this has increasingly been done through pictures and videos rather than in person. And in this page of my PPT presentation, I insert a short video in which is displayed in TikTok, but it also has the counterpart in Instagram with Reels. And the hashtag is Love and Couldn't Wear It. Basically, is like a challenge where people are willing to show the outfits that they were planning to wear during 2020, but they couldn't because of the coronavirus. Therefore, these items were wasted. So just I play it. Okay. In this manner, I claim that COVID-19 has produced a new aesthetic reality since the pandemic has profoundly changed our routines related to dressing ourselves and fashion, contributing to creating a discrepancy between what is actually worn and what we would like to wear if the conditions were different from quarantine and isolation. However, I also believe this change did not completely alter the mechanism of fashion, since during the quarantine we were able to discover again alternative channels through which we could communicate our choices of dress to others. Thank you.